Okay, first of all, thank you all for coming and welcome. I already congratulate and applaud you as people who are at least thinking, maybe I should be thinking of the data. So you're my type of people. Why am I here? Firstly, I'm here thanks to LastCon for recognizing that we need a database stream. That we need, or a data stream. I use database loosely, okay? Other than that, you know, who am I and why I'm talking about this? I am a data architect. I'm 19 years. I'm holding on to that 19 years because once it goes 20, it means something else in technology. Graduated twice from Dublin City University. That's Dublin, Ireland, not Dublin, Ohio. I know it causes lots of confusion because obviously my accent doesn't give it away at all. My master's was in secure computing and forensics, and that's how I had kind of accidentally through my career worked in large financial institutions, I'd been the security representative, etc. on teams, so that's how I kind of migrated into the security side of things. And I've been a LastCon volunteer for 3 years now since coming to Austin. So that's that. Have to have a bit of this owing to the nature of some of the content. Opinions and assertions presented here are not absolute, do not represent the opinions of LastCon, OWASP, or my employer. And the most important bit, the content of this talk does not constitute legal advice. Because I know there's 4 little letters there that probably got a lot of people coming here. Other disclaimer, having heard the start of the keynote, I'm not clever and I'm not funny. Okay, so let's just manage expectations here. So I'm going to talk on 3 seemingly disparate topics, okay? So data breaches, internal fraud, and GDPR. But they are part of a journey, and they've been my journey over 19, not 20 years. And the internal fraud is kind of a unique angle I have on GDPR. I just want people to be more aware. Just think internal fraud as well. So what is your company's most valuable asset? I realize I've probably given this away slightly in the title of the speech, but if you joined the corporate world 20 years ago, you were probably told something different. You were probably told people, 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 people. And it's not that we've lost all love for people. We probably have, but that's not the point here. With an increasingly mobile workforce, you know, you look at kind of statistics around how long people stay in a position, et cetera. People aren't who you rely on. You no longer rely on Mary in accounts to know by rote all your customers, etc. You rely on a database. So therefore, it's data. All right? I know the HR people don't like me saying that, but it is. Caesar's Palace bankruptcy. In their evaluation, the most fought over asset that they had was data. Wasn't there all their buildings, their hotels, their land in the heart of Las Vegas? It was the data. And why? After really in-depth, considered evaluation, does anybody know how much it was actually worth? Deemed to be worth. Anybody care to guess? $1 billion is how it was valued. So when the creditors were fighting over the assets, they were like, you can have the hotel. I want the data. And that's where that went on. It actually eventually went back to the parent company. The reason it was so valuable was they were kind of pioneers in big data. And this is not going to be an anti-big data talk. They had 17 years of data in what was called their Total Rewards loyalty program. Okay? So while other casinos were still doing, hey, I've seen him a lot, he seems to be splashing the cash at the moment, I'll comp a room. That works, you know, there's people who work in sales, they're good at spotting this type of things, but it's not perfect. That guy could have been on a stag weekend. He could have been, she could just be coming out of a divorce and she's spending every penny before he gets any of it, you know, so that's, they needed something tighter when you're working at scale. And in their loyalty rewards program, they were able to actually watch trends and see who they really should be comping, see who responds to being comped, is another thing. So this is why it was so valuable. But within that, they had so much data that it was useful to, it could be sold anywhere. Plus they've been quite loose around how it could be used and that type of thing, so everybody wanted it. And this is actually, Joshua Cantor was a VP of Caesars Palace in 2013, and he is quoted as saying in an interview, he said, big data is even more important than a gaming license. That is some statement to come out of somebody at that level in the gaming industry. But what he meant by it was, I can get a gaming license. There's a process, I follow it. But my data, you know, I lose my gaming license over something, it's inconvenient, it's painful, but I can probably pay some guys in suits to get it back for me. Your data, that you can't just, well, it's very expensive to go just buy. It's built up over time. You know, you can't buy trends now. You have to start, you have to have the vision to start collecting in advance. So that's what he meant by that. So you're all going to know all these logos. And, you know, some of you may have been affected by them. We've all heard the war stories. We've all gone, phew, wasn't me. Phew, wasn't my company. And then Target pretty much got everybody who bought novelty decorations for Halloween. And then everything just faded recently in September with Equifax. And the reason it did was, with the credit system in this country, you pretty much can't get away from using the credit bureaus. So there's an element of trust. We're going to hear lots of people talking about zero trust. I'm going to talk about trust in a kind of more natural way. We got to trust these things, you know. In the case of credit bureaus, you don't really have a choice if you're going to operate. So they've breached that trust massively. They've breached your data, but they've breached that trust massively. But what's it actually costing? So I'm going to point you to a few resources for this type of thing that are good both for as wake-up calls for ourselves, to mind go, why am I thinking of the data? And they're also good for sort of C-suite type of negotiations on what work you need done and convincing. So the Poneman Institute is a research wing of IBM, and they produce these reports annually. But the global average cost of a data breach at the moment is $3.26 million. And that's everything. That's fixing systems, that's, you know, lawsuits, and it is an average. But that's what you're talking about. It's not just minor money. It's not just Equifax where it's a big hit. All over the world, the average cost of record is, depending on who you listen to, it's kind of around the $11 seems to be consensus. You kind of go, not so bad. When you think of, you know, think of whatever your prime database is at work. Just think of one of them. If the whole thing got leaked, how many records is that? Don't answer, but many records is that. So what are companies doing about it? So lots of people have, you know, oh, we apply OWASP top 10 principles. We've worked into our code review process, so we're all good. And, you know, we go an extra step. We look at the SANS top 20, and we work with our ops department, and we do this on a certain cadence, and it's reliable and all the rest. But I am saying that we're forgetting what we're trying to protect. Data is king, okay? So nobody really wants your source code anymore, okay? No matter how many hours you labored over it, how much midnight oil you burnt. It's probably up on Stack Overflow anyway, you know? So nobody really wants your beautifully crafted code. If they go at your application, they want your data behind it, okay? It's the endpoint. And you've got to consider that you will be hacked if you're not currently hacked at the moment and just possibly don't know about it. So lots of people took kind of defense in depth kind of, I would say approaches. I said excuses and said, oh no, we've got the guys on the firewall and we've got the folks doing the application security and it'll never get back this far. But I just ask people to just think long and hard and answer honestly. If it does, how are you going to feel then? If it gets to the data layer, nearly said database layer, but the data layer, however you're holding it, how do you feel then? And how do you feel if you're going, I had an opportunity, I sat in LASCON, I got told from several other sources to mine my data, and I didn't, because I thought it'll be okay, it's so far back, it's so far down the stack. I don't like feeling foolish. I don't think most people do. So Equifax 2017, we touched on it. Let's delve into the details. It was caused by CVE 2017-5638, Apache structure vulnerability. It was reported in March 2017. Didn't really, you know, the breach was reported in September. It doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. That's why I'm so bored listing that off. Because I really don't care, now that my data's out there, I don't care whether it was CVE 2017 or CVE 2016 or any other, whether it was Apache, whether it was Tomcat, I'm bored already. I care who has my data now, why am I now purchasing PlayStations in Russia? You know, why am I having to lock down all my accounts? And what I mean is, it doesn't matter to the individual whose details have been breached. In Ashley Madison's case, people didn't really care. Lives were ruined, you know, choices were made, lives were ruined, families were broken up, and worse. You know, people really didn't care why. They just cared that it happened. So there's one thing that can be more embarrassing, okay? Yes, it can be more embarrassing than I didn't patch my software. And that's, what's if the threat comes from within, okay? And the reason that's more embarrassing is you failed on so many levels. You've possibly failed in your recruitment process. You have failed to manage your employees. You failed to keep them happy. You failed to keep tabs on what they're doing, you know? When something like this happens, you have to ask why. Now, I'll cut to the chase. It's generally financially motivated, okay? The reports have been done. But there are other reasons. So if it's financially motivated, why did you not know this about your staff? Okay. So this, I'm going to pray it out, is the Verizon 2017 DBIR, Database Breach Investigations Report, 10th edition. Get yourself one, they're free. I don't work for Verizon, as we said, but it's an excellent report, okay? And it looks at these type of factors, okay? So where I came across it goes back to my master's, and that's what I want to briefly show you today, was mine came from a very real world scenario. I used to start work very early in the morning just to manage my commute, and I worked for a very large bank in Ireland. So anybody who's been to Ireland knows now it's one of two companies. So it was one of those two. And I worked there all in for 15 years. And I was used to having the office to myself first thing in the morning. And I could tell you what order people came in. And I was working away. And I was assigned to a role where I was on the development team, but I'd spend 20% of my time on information security. So they had a different model. Instead of having a huge information security team, they had core, and then they had kind of evangelists in all the relevant teams. That's the way it worked. I just sat down for my coffee when my normally very witted, very snappily dressed manager spoke to me 4 times a year, kind of a check-in, literally pulled up a chair beside my desk, unshaven, the whole lot. And I was like, this isn't good. This can't be good. But what he said surprised me. He said to me, how could we prove that a DBA did something? I was like, good morning. And I started rattling off the usuals. You know, I didn't know we had multiple database, you know, we had Sybase, Oracle, DB2, just by the nature of the business. And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about here, but there's logs, there's this, there's that. And he's like, no. If they've cleared all that out. I was like, do you want to give me a bit more? And he's going, I have to go to a meeting. He goes, will you think about it? So I did think about it, and piecemeal over the next couple of hours, I got little bits of information fed to me. They generally were, that log is empty. There's nothing in the logons thing. There's nothing on the file system. They were all negative findings. And then about 3 o'clock, he launched back into the office and went, it's fine, they told me. I was like, okay. It turned out that a DBA had made a mess up in a script. And it wasn't actually that malicious at all. They were trying to cover the fact they hadn't followed process. Okay, they were so afraid of being accused. They had been meticulous about it, though, was the lesson that we learned from this. They had turned off auditing. They had cleaned up the log that logged the fact that auditing had been turned off. right? They changed the data. And what had happened was, it was only because somebody in the business said, that account is not at that value. It's the wrong value. Otherwise, this person, I always applaud them. What they did was perfect. It was only another human noticed the figure was wrong, because they'd even gone and they had to go back to backups. Of course, people doubted Mary in accounts who said, no, that value is wrong. They're going, Mary, you know, it hasn't changed. They had to compare 2 database backups and say, hang on, last night it was at 2.3 million and now it's at 2.1 million. We've no record of what changed, but they are 2 point in time database things. So he came forward and he said, I did this. I thought I just made it all go away and that it was fine, and he was just trying to get a change through. He'd run the wrong script and was trying to cover it all up and thought no harm, no foul. But that then, thanks very much, he then committed me to 2.5 years of masters, because I overdo everything. And I said, there has to be a way of doing this. I actually found that there's very little research out there about this. There's stuff about watching, there's some great papers you can read about watching patterns in, you know, data change that might suggest fraudulent behavior, but it doesn't actually, none of it answered what he did. Was he knew the system so well. He was the admin. He had the sys logins. He also had essentially root, for want of, he didn't have the root account, but he had an account that was as powerful in the domain that he was working. So he had everything he needed to do this, because he needed that at 3 o'clock in the morning when a system was down. So that's why he had all that. So were there some failings and separations of duty? Yeah, it kind of went afterwards to a point where we separated back out kind of the Unix sysadmin and the DBA, because of course the accountants had gone, let's merge them previously, but now they saw the problem with doing that. So there has to be a way of catching what he did. So I did my practicum, which is your thesis. And I used MySQL, frankly, because it was in education and I didn't have to pay for a license, and the source code is out there. So this was for illustrative purposes. I have to say, how, I went through lots of failed experiments, but how, had it been that scenario, could I have caught him? Could I have prevented them? Because I didn't want to actually catching them, the deed is done. So there's the plugin facilities, essentially APIs, I suppose, in MySQL terms, and you can write audit plugins, okay? The problem with them is that you can uninstall them, okay? So if you have access to everything, like, so he just turned it off. If I just blankly applied the ones that, you know, were out there, lots of people had written them, I was kind of going, but if I just uninstall the plugin, do my deed, reinstall the plugin because I have the Unix, the UX level access, nobody will ever know. So what I did was, I wrote my own version of it, and basically those who follow the code will say, if somebody tries to uninstall, you get a nice little error message out that says, yeah, if you really need to do this, go talk to information security, okay? So you do, there's downsides to this. You have to, you know, you're putting another binary into your install, and that was the idea. That was in my report. I said, if somebody got this and it was in the middle of, you know, a severity issue that they genuinely needed to turn off auditing because it was filling up logs or whatever, you got to pull information security in there, who will then give you the binary and say you have permission to swap it out. Takeaways from all that. Yeah, don't instrument or rewrite your DBMS, okay? It was an experiment. You know that support contract, that really expensive support contract, that's out the window if you go doing this, okay? Don't rely on logging. Genuinely don't rely on logging. Logging is, yeah, it's great, it's helpful, but don't assume, don't be that person who sits there and goes, it's not in the logs. Because now you've met me, now I've told you, this really happened. I saw the change on the account, and I saw that it was not in the logs. And I saw this wasn't a bad person. So imagine if they had been a bad person. Think that data is king. Everything else around it is just there to facilitate the usage of data, you know, to protect the data. You know, unfortunately, I love data. I surround myself in data all day, every day. Data is information. Information is key. And I'm a control freak, so I like having data around me all the time. But generally, you know, my mother's not great with getting a CSV file of all of her information handed to her. She wants some nice little pretty GUI on how, on her account balances and things like that. So you've got to think that data is at the core, and everything else we do allows access and collection of data. Know your data. Know it. You can't protect what you don't know. Okay? If you don't know what you have, you know, if I have all my worldly belongings out here, but I don't know what they are, I can't turn around and go, I think Deshaun made off with my wallet. Well, did you have it there? Something's gone. Was it there? I don't know. I don't really know what I had. I had no inventory of what was in my purse. Picking on Deshaun. Accept your responsibilities. You know, things like splitting out the on-call, you know, just to save a few pence. You know, accept that you are responsible for looking after this data. You know, don't try to dodge and say, oh, it'll never happen. You know, it will happen. It probably has happened. And separation of duties. Now, the separation of duties is an important one in the context of this talk, because we should do it anyway. It makes sense. You know, why give somebody all the keys? This goes way back beyond technology. Having one person with all the access, all the control, it's over history, it's never really ended well. So why do we suddenly kind of do it in technology? And it's a lot of the legislation around, you know, GDPR and SOX and that, actually call it out and say separation of duties. So if you only remember one thing, know your data. I'll go a little bit further. Love your data. Join me. Now, GDPR, 25th of May, 2018. Okay. If anybody came in here thinking I'm going to have all the solutions, there is no silver bullet. So I'm going to look this way for 2 minutes and you can walk out if you want. Okay. But I'm being very, very honest, okay? There is no silver bullet. So I don't mind those slipping out the back door right now. I can tell you straight up, this actually isn't as big a deal in Europe, because until now, the Data Protection Act that, you know, controlled my day, morning, noon, and night over there, this is very similar. It's just it has gone further and it's extended the kind of jurisdiction. But it's not a bad thing. And this is what I'm saying about accepting responsibilities. There's no point pushing against it, really. You know, you can always inform yourself and, you know, by all means, you know, encourage people who have the time and energy to get involved in submitting to forums and lobbying and that type of thing. But the intentions of it are really, really good, okay? And it's one of these things. Pushing against it, you're just wasting time. There's a few misconceptions about it. A lot of people, I've noticed here, are chasing it right now and saying, oh, we have till May 2018. It's actually already law. It's just not enforceable. But I've heard lots of people, even up to consultants, saying, yeah, it becomes law next year. And like, it is law. There's just currently no penalty for it. So there's a few main things. The difference between it and the Data Protection Act, which preceded it, was that the Data Protection Act was a directive. Okay? A directive just meant that, if you imagine the European Union as kind of the federal authority in each of the union states, then they'd take it, so we accept it, and we're going to interpret it ourselves into our law. This time it's just been, this is the law. So it's truly making it one law for the entire union. So there's lots, there is lots in it. Right to access, breach notification within 72 hours to Data Protection Authority, right to be forgotten or right to erasure, data portability. Frankly, if you don't need to move your EU data out of the EU, probably don't, because you can, but you're putting a lot of extra work on yourself. Privacy by design. So it's a bit like, I suppose you probably hear from some people here today, security by design. I'll bring that to the next step, privacy by design. Think privacy first. Think, how am I going to protect this data? That's actually in it. That's in the law. Consent is a big thing. So people have to explicitly opt in to things. So that's a change of mindset. And you must actually have a data protection officer. if your company is above a certain size, but I think it's quite a small size, so take it as generally you have to have a data protection officer. And if you are audited, it's not good enough to have your janitor who doesn't actually know where anything is listed as the data protection officer. It has to be somebody who is well versed in GDPR, knows the obligations and that type of thing. If you try and present somebody else, you will be deemed to have failed, to be non-compliant. Look at the road to GDPR. So a lot of people, I put this up here because a lot of people think this has just come out of the blue. So it was 1981, the Convention for the Protection of Individuals with regard to automatic processing of personal data. It was very forward-thinking legislation. It was signed by everybody except Turkey. Turkey never bought into it. And it was the first recognition of going, whoa, this computer thing has taken off. Maybe we need to take account of that. Maybe it might affect people and how their data is processed. So it wasn't very future-proof, but they did actually start to recognize that they needed to do something about this. So then it was a long road from there until the Data Protection Directive in 1995. It was the first that said, things like right to know what is being stored about you was a big thing. Right to have it corrected if it was inaccurate. Have decisions reviewed. Lots of the states, like Ireland, for example, in 1998 they reviewed it. So you'd see there's the Data Protection Act 1995 and 1998 because they kind of went, oh, we didn't interpret it the way we wanted to. We'll add another layer. So GDPR then, it's been evolving all along. And they said, hang on, we've got things, as the web becomes more of a thing, boundaries are being blurred. Where is jurisdiction? Where is, it's no good to say, I've protected you really well here, but your data just got breached the other side of the world. And that's where GDPR came from. So it's been a seismic shift for companies who want to do business in Europe, but aren't in Europe. Up until now, it's like, local laws apply, that type of thing. So this is going to be a change. And it hasn't been finalized, and a lot of people are kind of saying, oh, the details haven't been worked out as to how, they're going to cooperate with authorities here, but there have been undertakings given that they will cooperate. So if you're putting your eggs in that basket, expect to have your eggs cracked. So these are the main differences between, it'll be common rules across the whole EU. So there's no more, Poland interprets it this way, Germany this way. Personal data is redefined. This is something that's hitting people badly. It's everything. They're trying to make this future-proof, so there isn't GDPR 2017, 2018, 2019, that they're trying to make this future-proof because they realize they can't stay ahead of the evolution of it. So it's things like, anything like internet handles, they've called it. So, Party Girl 87, that actually identifies a physical person. So mandatory brief notification, individual rights, the financial repercussions. 4% of your global revenue. So no, you do not get to say, I only have 2 guys in my office in Germany, the revenue is only 20 grand a year. That's not what your penalty is. It will be 4% of your 20 million or 20 billion or whatever global revenue. And that's very clear. And that's not to actually try and grab money. That is a deterrent. That's saying we are serious about this time. Joint responsibility, so you have your data processor and your data controller. Previously, there was like, the data controller was pretty much responsible for everything. Now, as a data processor, which if you're selling software as a service or anything like that, you need to be aware, you may be a data processor for somebody, for a data controller who has European data. You now have responsibility, so you now need to review your contracts. You now need to review, am I ready to go into this market? Am I prepared to go into this market? Do I need to do something about this contract? Do I need to not do business with this? That would be kind of short-sighted, but do I need to not do business with these people again? Maybe I'm not ready. But you can't go, I didn't know. That's the thing about know your data. Information governance and truly global impact. There have been, really strong undertakings that there will be cooperation. So, I've got a huge thing that says data minimization. It seems kind of counterintuitive. So we've come along and we've touched on a lot of things around, the trust that your clients put in you when they give you data. knowing your data. The one thing that you can do, and is recommended by in all the legislation and all the supporting groups, there's loads of groups out there, and if anybody wants any pointers, I could talk to you about this, the GDPR coalition that are voluntary groups that are helping companies come up with this, is data minimization. Whether it's your annoyed sysadmin who's met some guy in a bar who told him he'll pay him whatever amount of money for 20 gigs of your sales database. Whether it's your sales guy who's, jumping ship and bringing your clients with them. Whether it's, again, Marion in accounts who has access to the medical records and decides to see what the neighbour has, how long she has to live. Maybe there's a property coming up for sale in the neighbourhood soon. The key thing about this is data minimization. In the era of big data, we've kind of gone to grab everything. Grab everything we can, it can only be good. And our marketing departments are telling us, and grab more. But if you do that, you have to ask yourself, am I prepared to protect it? So in the legislation, there's lots of wording around, where you're legally required to keep something, for for its lifetime, establishing the lifetime of the data. You can make all sorts of cases for, I really needed this in order to send them their 10% discount or something like that. It's like, not if the person doesn't, want your product anymore. But the main thing is to ask, to really look deep and say, do I need this? Because the less data you hold, the less you breach. When you have a breach, it's going to be smaller. Did you really need? Lots of companies use social security number and just the last 4 digits. Did you really need that? Could you not just have assigned your customer a customer ID? Your database will probably do that for you. It was convenient. We wanted to be sure that it was the person. Yeah, and now a laptop has ended up in landfill and somebody's picked up the hard drive of it and you've breached all those things. And if you looked deep down, you really didn't need it. So know your data and data minimization. They're what you remember, and love your data. That's what I want you to take away from this. This is actually why I say I wish GDPR had come along sooner, because we've gotten miles ahead of ourselves with big data, and we didn't know about GDPR. So we're kind of closing the stable door after the horse has bolted a bit. Somebody's chasing the horse, all right, but. So within the legislation, if there's a legal requirement to hold on to the data, so I always use the example because of what we work in certain companies, we would have maintenance teams go around and we can say through the software, I need somebody in this building to, there's a short on a light. It has to be a qualified electrician, okay? So I have the name of the electrician who carries out the work and that all his credentials are up to date. So he gets fired next week and goes, I want everything out of your system belong to me. And I say, well, and I have to do that, but, so his home address and all that has to go. But I need to hold on to his name and the fact that he carried out that work. Because if somebody touches it next week and gets electrocuted, I had to have a certified electrician do it. I can't come back and go, I don't know, I've now filled the field with unknown user and whatever. So that's actually covered off in the legislation. If there's a legal requirement to hold it. There's also, and this is kind of, I think, what helped with the US coming on board with saying we will cooperate, national security. Or, if there's a reason that you need it for that. But you will have to be careful. This is why I harp on about knowing your data. You can't say, well, John Malone asked for his data to be removed, but he was an electrician, so therefore I can't take out any of his data. No, you have to know that the record of the fact that it was him who did that particular repair, I have a legal requirement to keep his home address, whatever. I don't need to keep that if I have no legal reason for that. So I can't just say, I'm not doing your erasure. You have to let them know I will be keeping certain parts, but all the rest is gone. And the other thing is you have to evidence it. Now that's one that people are getting a little bit confused about, and it hasn't been proven. Like, what do? Send them the results of select star from where name equals, So If you have a huge development team, maybe you're putting a front end on this and you can show them before and after. This is all the data. Afterwards, same report run, no records found. You know, could somebody keep pushing it? Go, I don't trust your software. I want to see it. Yeah, you could end up in theory at the select star from scenario. You touched on something else. Was the data processors. This is. I'm going to be one of those really annoying people who goes back to this. So that's about, previously, as I said, it used to be the data controller's problem. You know, you collected the data, your problem. Yeah. But now it's kind of going, and now the data processor was never without responsibility, but they were it was much looser. There was a lot of, how can I know what I have? You know, you gave it to me. Now it's joint responsibility around processing. This is what companies have to go through. If you're not dealing with, but this is know your data. If you're accepting data, you have to know your data from here on in, because you are liable. The I don't know pose isn't going to work anymore. You know, so if you're accepting data, you have to know your data. You have to start having that conversation with clients. Will you be storing the personal information of EU citizens in this system? Yeah, very much. There's probably going to be a lot of your fault, my fault. I have 3 little boys. I see that going 3 ways the whole time. I could see that happening with sub-processors. That it was him. So yes, definitely. It's not, the thing is, this hasn't been through the courts yet. But you don't want to be the one, like people keep saying, they'll never come looking at little old me. And it's like, what if they do? You know, that you don't want to be the one that is tested out from. I would encourage people to watch the cases as they come up. Don't wait until the cases come up to start doing anything about GDPR. That's a bad idea. But watch them as they come up and say, okay, what would that mean for me? But yeah, there's data just, we're having to go back and say, have we got European data? Or the data belong to European citizens? It's fine to have European data. You know, if you just have stuff about countries, that's fine. Yeah, there's been discussions. So obviously within the European Union, it's easier because it's just it's European Union law. But at the moment, they're trying to decide. They've just made agreements that there will be cooperation. They're just trying to decide: will it be at state levels? Will we have a federal authority for it? That hasn't been published yet. I think negotiations are ongoing. They'll have it. They all seem quite happy and calm about the agreement, so I think the talks are quite a long way along. So I think it will be announced before May 2018. That is the thing with the breaches. You'll still be obliged to inform the DBAs, so the Data Protection Authority, in the country where the data was breached from. So let's say you had Irish data, and you know there's a breach, you've got to contact the Data Protection Authority in Ireland or the ICO in the UK if you have UK data. So in theory, if you had data from all 28 states, you'd have to contact them all in the 72 hours. So one of the hopes is that will actually be an upside to having a central kind of point of contact in the US, that you'll just tell them, we had a oopsie, can you go talk to our friends in Europe and tell them we had a oopsie? But that hasn't been worked out yet. But that's something a lot of people are pushing for. Well, if they sell it, then you're requiring data, therefore you're a data controller. If they, on the other hand, are using you to process data, so let's say a client of mine, I sell them software as a service. I know this is not, so forget about that's the Facebook scenario. So I sell software as a service, okay? The difference between me selling them an on-premise solution and software as a service is on-premise solution, it's on them if they decide to record all sorts of things and they're kind of going, your man's religion is this, that's probably why he didn't do a very good job on the electrical fix that day because he'd been in church, or, you know, that's on them, okay? I have no control over it. Just like Microsoft, if I use, if I buy and install Word, not cloud versions, and I start writing malicious letters in it, it's not on Bill Gates what I do with it, okay? However, software as a service, they are the controller because they have their agents or their staff, whatever, gathering it, but I am a processor because I'm storing it, be it in my cloud solution, be it in my data centers or whatever, I'm a processor then. So you have to know your customer, know your data. You can't say, I didn't know they were using it. You're going to get yourself in trouble there. So in a lot of cases, this is going to require people going back over who are my existing clients, because ignorance is not going to be a plea on this one. There is now, what they've done is, because I know Poland was one in particular that didn't like it, they said they had their own laws on top of the previous Data Protection Act. What they've tried to do in GDPR is bring that all up to a higher level. So there's the portability of data. That's that bit. It's not on that slide. It was on one of the slides. There's rules around that now. That's where I was saying it's basically easier to just leave it in. If a country continues to have that a rule that actually has kind of a higher bar, you will only kind of be breaching that law. That's between you and that country, and that's if you choose to do business in that country. It is pretty much aligned. I'm kind of saying there's a few edge cases, but you'd have to be particularly targeting the Polish market with, a Polish version of the website and all, and then say, if you do that, then you have to comply with the Polish laws. If you happen to have a website and you say, yeah, I take payments from Europe, you can argue the thing of, I wasn't specifically targeting that. They paid in US dollars, they gave me a shipping address. You'd have to be targeting that particular market. And there is, this is not meant to be punitive. If somebody goes out of their way to circumvent the intended use of your website, and you never intended to sell into this market, and you can prove that, and you end up with one customer in Germany accidentally, who gave you a PO box somewhere in the US for one of these mail forwarding services to deliver the thing, gave you a virtual credit card, there was nothing that you realistically could have done, and then you're deemed to not have targeted, not intended to do business in that market. That's not the same as what you're asking about going, somebody gave me a big load of data and I didn't ask what was in it. Okay, that you're on the hook for. The guy who uses the mail forwarding address, you're not on the hook for. No, disclaimer is, you can try, but a disclaimer is no legal standing here. If you like writing disclaimers, by all means, but not worth the paper it's printed on, yeah. So that's another thing. You have to have your privacy policy and all that up to date and accessible. That's another thing. People have to be able to get at and understand your privacy policy. This GDPR is about protecting the individual's rights. It's about making people feel safer in the new internet age type thing and going forward. And that's why I put the breaches in with this, just to remind people it's not okay. You do actually hit people's lives. You hit their pockets, you may hit worse than that with kind of health data and that type of thing. The other thing is there's different categories of data under GDPR. So health data, something that can have, previous legislation was more concerned with, does it have a financial impact and that type of thing. Now it's like, does this cause them distress in any way? So you can lose data about somebody that, you lose my ID that says Party Girl 87. You've lost my data, you've not been in the spirit of the legislation, probably not going to ruin my life. All my friends know I'm Party Girl. You lose the fact that Party Girl 87 has some disease she doesn't want other people to know about. That's called out in the legislation as sensitive data. That's going to be in the courts quicker. That's going to have higher penalties. So the 4% is like for the worst cases. I think, and I'm going to put think there, this is purely opinion and conjecture, I think they're going to go after the ones that spill that type of data.
People ask questions. If you have questions afterwards.
Yeah, come find me. I'm here for the next 2 days. Thank you for your time. I'll be posting the slides.